Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of ReveNew. This is Greg Dolan, your host, CEO, and co-founder of Keen Decision Systems. I have the pleasure of welcoming Mike Black, who is the CMO of Profitero, to ReveNew for our conversation today. Really excited to have Mike, who's a self-proclaimed e-commerce geek, to have a great conversation around the emergence of retail media and also the explosive acceleration of e-com and how those worlds are colliding and impacting organizations. Just a bit of background about Mike. So Mike brings a few decades of leadership experience heading up product marketing and demand gen efforts for industry-leading analytics and technology companies. Mike also spent time prior to Profitero as vice president of product marketing at Nielsen. He was responsible for launching new analytic products for the company's retail measurement business, and also led marketing for Nielsen's innovation practice. So Mike's been at the forefront of innovation in this industry for a few decades. For those of you that don't know, Profitero is a leader in the e-commerce analytics business. They were founded by data scientists and engineers who helped build Google's innovative search indexing technology, as well as IBM's Watson AI platform. And with this power together, built a technology platform capable of processing 500 million product data points daily so brands can measure and improve their e-commerce performance. So really powerful solution and really at the forefront of a continuously evolving industry and growing platform for marketers and brands to reach their consumers. So Mike, welcome to ReveNew.
Greg, great to be here. Thanks for a great introduction. Really appreciate it. I never thought I'd reach the point in my career where I could say I have decades of experience, but I guess that day has arrived.
We're really excited about this conversation. We've been talking a lot about retail media, and clearly, as in our experience, and want to get your take on this, we've seen organizations having to change and adjust based on the emergence of retail media. And it's been challenged by the fact that, marketers really haven't taken an omnichannel perspective. And, with the emergence and growth of e-commerce channels, I think it's caused siloed organizations to really rethink how they're organized and how they go to market. And a lot of times that's created some misalignment between the business side of the house and marketing. And just want to get your take on what you're seeing in the industry across organizations.
Well, I think if you start with it, we've gone through a tremendous amount of change in the industry in the last 3 years. And I think with change, there's always a lag in terms of catch up. And there's always a period of time where the organization has to catch up. And we've seen this through technologies, way back to when social media came through and the early stages of digital marketing. It took a long time for organizations to figure out the right ways to structure around that. And I think we see these structural challenges happening still. Companies are still trying to figure out what exactly does omnichannel mean? How do we fit these pieces together? And I think retail media really brings that to life. Because really what we see today is there's sort of silos in different teams of the organization. I'll start a really good example is the silos between the teams managing the retail media spending and we'll call the sales teams, right? The commercial teams, the people that actually look after these products every day, as we find that there is a silo. So the most common one we see is, retail media teams are out there, bidding on keywords, bidding on campaigns, trying to move the levers on an Amazon and a Walmart. And what they sometimes don't know is that there's issues with these products, right? Because you can't separate traffic and conversion on an e-commerce site. Your ROI is only going to be as good as the product you're driving traffic to. But we see that the media teams often aren't able to see that. They don't know when a certain product has a profitability issue. They don't know when a certain product has an inventory issue or bad content, which happens all the time. And so what we're starting to see is that there's a little bit of a disconnect. And what will happen is the media teams will spend a lot of money on products that maybe don't yield great profit or great conversion. And then there's, a lot of wastage in the system. And that's just kind of an example. And we're trying to lead at Profitero is this idea of shelf intelligent media, which is automatically connecting product health indicators with media bidding tools so that can just be done automatically, right? If you ask humans to figure it out, they won't. But if we use technology, this can happen in a more synergistic way. And that's just one example of the types of silos that we're starting to see between retail media. And there's other ones that can go into too as well.
So I'm curious, as this continues to emerge and evolve, what is a structure that you've seen really make sense, where an organization can the left hand can talk to the right hand, and you're starting to see some more cohesiveness in terms of the go-to-market and understanding all the dimensions of traditional brick and mortar retail versus e-com?
Yeah, we see it kind of move. It moves in kind of a maturity curve. Usually what happens is the very first thing is in a low maturity organization when they're just getting started, you need to develop those like specialized, abilities. And so what happens is e-commerce becomes like almost like a sidecar, we call it. They're developing, you're starting to build out people that understand the channel, and then they're doing lots of things kind of on their own independently, to make the engine run. And then over time, what happens is they start to get a little more integrated in the business. And then eventually we call a democratized structure, right? So if you think kind of a sidecar, like, an Amazon team stands up and they're doing their thing, eventually what we emerge to is this idea that, all right, what we're going to have is effectively a lot of the responsibility for e-commerce is going to fall in the existing structures. So we have a commercial team. They call on retailers. They need to start looking at the things they always look at: availability, profit. They need to look at it from an omni perspective. Okay, we have a marketing team. Okay, they run the shopper marketing team. They run campaigns. We need now them to wear a second hat and now think about these campaigns from an e-commerce perspective too. So gradually, what happens is the existing teams start to pick up the knowledge, the learning. And what happens is that central e-com team becomes more of an enablement function, right? They're there to set up the systems, the tools, the data, the training that allows that democratization to happen. And that's kind of where we see it, is instead of being the doers, they become the enablers. And then you get technologies and systems to make sure that links all together. It's a very gradual transition because you can't just skip steps. You can't just say, okay, one day we have a COE and tomorrow, we have an e-com team and then it goes away, because you have to train people and get them ready. But that's kind of how we see it gradually. So the perfect structure, there is no perfect structure, it changes a lot. But generally what happens is the commercial teams, the sales teams, the marketing teams, they all start to take on elements of the job. And then there are sort of centralized functions that they can go to for help. They're never going to know all the end-all, be-all of retail media ins and outs. It's changing so fast. So there are people in the business that can be brought in as consultants to help. But effectively, more and more of that work is happening in those existing structures.
We're seeing that a lot more, where we've seen silos and, the e-commerce organizations rolling up to the chief sales officer, chief customer officer, and the marketing team is kind of rolling up to a CMO and the president of a division with the P&L, and they don't even talk to each other. And about 30% of the marketing dollars are going through the e-commerce group. None of that's being measured in the same way as the rest of the retail spend. So it's really interesting to see. We have started to see more and more kind of organizational structural changes where they're bringing together in commercial organizations, and one group, to your point, is kind of looking across the entire organization and thinking holistically and from an omnichannel perspective. But it seems really slow in terms of the maturation, and I'm wondering if that's the way you guys are seeing it as well.
It really is. We actually have a stat. We do a study every year, and what we do is we ask, as part of our question to do a benchmark study, we ask people to rate themselves in different areas of competency. But one of the questions we ask is, what structure do you follow in? And so I mentioned the kind of sidecar, and then there's the democratized. Only about 19% of manufacturers identify as being truly democratized. That's up from last year, about 20%, but it's still very small. And that basically means that there is still a learning curve. And I always feel like there's like a litmus test you can do that's kind of a tip of the spear. And one of the things that I'm finding is the tip of the spear is category management. Like, you can tell a lot by where a company is in their maturity to the degree in which their category management teams are going into retailer conversations with omnichannel data versus not. Because what that tells me is that they understand, because the retailers are going to be the ones that are going to come on the category management team. And what I find is that's very telling to me, because if the category management teams are starting to bring it together, it's starting to come into JBPs, and I kind of know they're ahead. But if you talk to a company and you're like, well, what does your category management team do about omnichannel? And they look at you with a blank face, and you kind of know where they're at. So I would say we're probably going to approach close. And next time we do the survey, I would imagine we're probably going to be somewhere between, if it was 19%, it's probably going to be somewhere between 20-25% optimistically this year.
They really need to change, though. I mean, it's interesting if you think about where the leverage lies right now in the relationship, and it's almost entirely with the retailer, right? And you have the brands coming in for joint business planning, and they don't have 75, 80% of them don't have the information necessary to actually have the right negotiation or conversations with the retailer around data and analytics and measurement. And we're seeing it as a growing use case for us as well, from a measurement and optimization standpoint, to say, if you're going to spend money at Walmart, you got to think about it in terms of retail media, shopper, trade, but also the impact that Walmart media can have on other channels and other retailers outside of Walmart. So, I mean, there's a whole exercise needed to really understand the holistic impact.
That is the crux of the problem. I think change follows measurement, and measurement has been very far behind. And this is something we talk a lot about, and we try to educate people on. And you might have heard the term of digitally influenced sale versus e-com, right? Yep. All these metrics that get reported about penetration rate, they don't tell the full story. Like, my president of my company, we like to talk, she's, in basketball, you get points for assists, but in e-commerce, you don't. Right. Right. And so what happens is you're only as big as that penetration rate. But in reality, and we've been doing our own sort of studies around this, because Forrester has done some great, and we're doing some great studies where, Forrester says, well, 62% of sales are digitally influenced, which means that there's like a halo effect, like people research online and they shop in store, vice versa. We're finding it's kind of closer to like 77%. And that when you ask consumers, they're even evaluating the PDP content. They think that's more important to in-store signage, right? So there's a whole story that doesn't get told out. And because of that, then we don't, our executives teams, our retailers, they don't know how to think about it. They don't care about it. So right. I think once we start, looking, if we find metrics that can speak to the totality, and I know this is stuff that you guys do, kind of peel back the iceberg and show that there's more there. I think that once we get that story out, it will accelerate the momentum. Because I think the momentum right now is with probably more of like the early leaders, like the fast movers. They get it, they're going to move. I think once we change the measurement broader, then I think we'll see more kind of momentum on this front. We'll see this stuff accelerate even faster. So
I'm just curious how would you drive that change with companies, and turn that 19% into 30, 35, 40%. It's interesting that when they don't come upon the conclusion themselves very quickly, how do you really start to influence that change?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think the change is going to happen with some retailers versus others. I think you have to understand where the tipping point's going to be. So the first thing I would look at is, let's start in the Walmart team. Let's start in the Kroger team, and let's use that as the testing ground, because they're always leading the way in Walmart in particular. So if we change that equation, then I think we start there. And the other part is, I think a little more in terms of evolution versus revolution. Change is very scary. And what I think sometimes we do is e-com folks in particular, we speak about jargon and things that are very intimidating. And I think one of the opportunities is to have quick wins. So let's look at, what is the JBP template we use every year? And what if we added 5 elements or 3 elements of omnichannel into that? What if we look at our business review template? What if we, add a few more metrics? It's kind of starting with what we do now and gradually adding different elements in. It's like slow change. It's like that song, it's a spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down.
Right.
But I kind of gradually do that. And I think the other opportunity is, what's our next big tentpole event? I think organizations rally around tentpoles. We have a new product. Okay. Why don't we try, what would it look like if we do this product launch in store? What if we add omnichannel elements into it? What does that look like? And I think then it becomes a model that says, wow, that didn't hurt so bad. That wasn't so bad. And you just build case studies. You find one team, one use case, you have a couple of examples, and then you do it. And I think sometimes the change feels so overwhelming. People don't know where to start. And I guess I would kind of pick a few battles and try to evolve. Don't try to revolutionize, and get those people to make them heroes, the ones that did it, like have them stand up. And I think that's the way that's the way change happens in that way.
Just pull them forward one inch at a time, right?
Yeah, exactly.
We feel the same way.
Yeah.
I'm curious because going through COVID, obviously there was a shift in consumer behavior and consumer shopping behavior, and I think that benefited e-commerce. We're seeing that momentum continue. How are e-commerce leaders thinking differently about growth today than they were a couple of years ago? And what does the future hold? What kind of questions are they asking themselves?
Yeah. So a lot of the questions that, I think past years, a lot of it was about growth at all cost. And I think you saw this the very first thing companies will start doing is, okay, we're just going to start spending media dollars, right? We're just going to start driving traffic. And then quickly you realize, wow, this is kind of diminishing returns because the products that we're driving traffic to, when you add in the media costs, don't have ROI, or we're being crapped out, we're not making profitability. And then suddenly you're like, wow, the hard work is actually, we have to change our infrastructure. We have to change our ways of working to make this profitable. And I think then you see companies kind of take almost like a reset and then go forward. And I kind of get that sense today in some ways, is that we're coming out of an environment where there's been extreme margin pressure. Obviously, we are kind of carrying this extra cost of media spend. Like there's always a cost to retail. But now there's this extra cost where we're getting hit up by retailers for media dollars, and now they want to sell us data, and it's like, where do we go, right? How do we carry this? So I'm starting to see people look a little bit more at the kind of the profit equation, and I think that is coming to life in a couple ways. A lot more work on portfolio rationalization, really looking at what are the products that we're putting out there online what is the ROI? Okay, what do we do to renovate that? Price pack is a big area. And then I also see the conversation shifting a little bit less from what I'll call activity to achievement. So instead of thinking about the tactics, how do we think about the strategy and get back to the category strategy, right? When we think about growth, we think about growth from acquiring new customers, increasing frequency, basket size, like the formulas are the same. And I think I'm seeing kind of brands try to take a step back and say, okay, how do we take, instead of like spending the media dollars, how do we think about it in a way that's smart against the objectives that we're trying to do? Or how do we launch, like a better assortment offering to drive this strategy? So I kind of see that getting a little more back to the strategic roots. And if we have that right strategy, then all those tactics should be much more efficient for us. So it's a little bit more of a, I guess, category and shopper market mindset. And it's funny because I see a lot of shopper marketing category people moving into e-com in the last couple of years. And I think they're bringing that mentality in, less about tactics and more about how to get back to the core of category growth and then look at everything we do from that. And I've seen that in a couple cases now where we're seeing that almost that cross-pollination of that mindset into the e-com space.
Really interesting. With the lack of any kind of structural organizational cohesion, I'll say. So if you have all of that work happening on the e-commerce side and it's misaligned with what's happening with the rest of the marketing organization, how do you handle that kind of misalignment? What are the how do we think about that in terms of making sure that everyone's rowing in the same direction?
Yeah, well, so the very first thing is, I think, when we have e-com morphing it, kind of going into parts of the business where we have an education gap, then we have a risk of budget issues, right? So say you have a CEO, you have a CMO, grew up in traditional brick and mortar, they can't relate one half to the other. There's a risk there because they're not going to see that full digitally influenced sale, and they might not allocate budget the right way. So education is so critical, and simplifying and finding these statistics and like raising awareness. It's still like 80% of an e-commerce's job. So I think the first thing is education, and it has to be breaking through, using the language that they grew up with. Like, they don't think in terms of share of page one, and they don't think in terms of cost per click, right? So we have to kind of translate it. So I think education becomes still continue important, is kind of getting that through. And then I also do think that systems really will make this work. I think humans can take it so far. So I'll give you a good example of that. Again, gets back to the media use case. I think we can preach and say, well, retail media teams need to be looking at product, information and conversion, but we know that changes too quickly. There's not enough time in the day. They may not know how to interpret that. So that's why we have to look for ways that we can connect our data and say, okay, great. Well, we have this tool stack here, this tool stack here. I want these things connected. And I think you almost need to have someone who's looking at that process and looking like an engineering, saying, okay, what are the things that I know we can, with a system, better connect and drive change through, and try to drive that and make it more automatic, more operational. So I think that's another element, is just kind of trying to bring the technology together and looking at your tech stack and looking at your partners and saying, which ones work together? How do I get them to work better? Because if my digital shelf tools don't talk to my media tools, that silo is going to be reflected in my company. So how do I break that down, right? And I think that's how we're going to look at the tech stack in the future. Is we're not going to think about these individual pieces. We're going to actually talk more about ecosystems and interoperability, because that's the only way we can get that to work in our companies.
Couldn't agree more. And we think a lot about demonstrating, quantifying the interaction effects and halo effects across that entire ecosystem, right? So digitally influence, as an example, how do we fully quantify the impact of a spend at Walmart or Amazon on the rest of the brand and business, and vice versa? I mean, it all has a role in driving towards an omnichannel impact on the consumer, and we got to be able to demonstrate that.
Yep.
Awesome. So curious, your advice for questions that e-com leaders should be asking themselves, given all the trends that you're seeing and how things are moving forward in the industry.
Yeah. Oh my God, there's so many questions. I kind of, I think it has to come down to prioritization. I think prioritization is probably the biggest challenges that we have. So I think the first question is, okay, where's the categories? Where's growth going to come from in our categories, and which brands are going to be the ones growing? Get that sense of what that strategic focus should be. And then I think within that, the question then is, which retailers are going to be most critical to driving growth? Because I think all retailers are not equally equipped to help you accomplish your e-com objectives, and I think you have to have a good set list of criteria, things that must be true for you to overinvest. Things like, well, first of all, like programmatic advertising is table stakes. The ability, if the retailer is able to help you, if you can change your content real quickly, if you can, control variables that help you in conversion, that's a plus in their favor. If they give you shopper data, right? That allows you to tie back to measurement. That should be a plus. So I think kind of looking at your category strategy brands and then really scrutinizing your retailers and making big bets on which retailers will give you the most runway and the most flexibility is important. I don't think we can spread ourselves thin anymore in this world.
And those are the retailers, to your earlier point, that are going to be driving the necessary change in the industry as well.
Exactly.
Awesome.
And they will always be lower maturity. I think it's, segmentation, there will always be the retailers that are there, and then there's going to be the next ones, and you don't want to ignore them. That's more of an education. Like, hey, we win by educating them, and hopefully we can be the category captain that they pilot these things with. But it's just being clear there's going to be different playbooks for different retailers, and I think asking a lot of questions about that will help lead you to the right motions and make sure you're not you're being very efficient with the limited resources you have.
Awesome. So Mike, timely question here. Clearly, we're in a really tough economic environment that's impacting budgets. It's impacting headcount in a lot of the organizations that we work with. Curious how that's impacting, the way e-commerce leaders are looking at the business, how they're spending money, how they're strategically looking to kind of get through this difficult time and kind of navigate the difficult waters that we see ahead.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Greg. I think there's a couple things. One is I think it's accelerating a really hard look at organization and efficiencies and processes. And I think one of the big trends that I see a lot is this really acceleration towards movement of automation. I think and it's not to replace people, but I actually think more to maximize the resources you have. So there are a lot of elements of e-commerce that are very operationally manual and complex, content being one of the biggest areas. I mean, just being able to take your content from a centralized place, get it out there, update it. There's a lot of things that go into managing Amazon in particular that are operationally difficult. We find that brands spend a lot of time chasing Amazon for things. And what I'm seeing is this whole industry of automation coming in to complement and enable those teams. So those e-com teams, they're going to stay lean. I mean, they're going to be tight. So we have to find a technology solution to maximize the time they have. So I see a lot of this like acceleration towards automation. This is also the thing that is driving a lot of the interest in the AI, because we can realize that there's now a path with AI, especially in the generative side of content, to create these things that were taking us a lot of time and resources. So I think every e-com leader is looking at these technologies and saying, how do I do more with less? How do I do it better and faster? So there's this automation element of it that is like more the internal stuff. Then externally, it's comes down to value creation, right? Like, where do we sit with consumers, and what can we do differently? How do we change our value equation around price, for example? A lot of companies, past price increases along last year, they might now be looking at their portfolio and saying, how do we create more value from our price pack? Like, there's a lot of focus on trying to renovate our portfolio to make that work. And so there's the value creation, what we can do with our products in our control. And then it's what I call the external value creation, which is when you're in an environment like now, it's never more important to get your brand message across. And I've always seen that their brands, you look at brands that like P&G, like during the recession in 2008, they didn't stop marketing. They actually marketed more, right? Because they saw that they needed to communicate value. Same goes with e-com. We should not be looking at our e-com work and saying, well, we should scale back all this work. We got to make sure more than ever that our brand content is communicating our value, that our consumer reviews are communicating our value, and that we're showing up in search, because you know what consumers are going to see most likely? They're going to see private label. In fact, private label is occupying more search position than ever. You got to stand out. And the tools in your toolkit are content, reviews. And so I think rather than retreat from that, I think it's all the more reason to say we can't afford not to invest in these areas, because we will become irrelevant, and a consumer will buy private label and we'll never get the chance, because once they're in their reordered
Right.
list, we'll never see them again. So I think we got to use this as a call to action to double down on the e-commerce investment, not scale back.
I mean, one of the big frustrations that I have is the knee-jerk reaction is to cut costs. And, we've quantified the impact of going dark, and we've seen that brands would have to spend two times as much in marketing after going dark than they would if they would have just maintained continuity. And what you're talking about is exactly right. I mean, you have to still be, regardless of the economic conditions, you have to be front and center in front of consumers. They're going to make a different choice. And, it's not only about automation around content, but also kind of where you put your dollars to engage the consumer as well. And I really loved your point around AI being and automation being more of a way to maximize performance, right? So it's getting more out of your resource. I saw a Marketunist cartoon today that kind of talked about AI, and like it was making fun of AI as a cost-cutting tool versus AI as a performance maximization tool. And I think that's exactly what you're talking about. It's an opportunity as marketers to now take advantage of these tools and the data and technology to be able to drive more performance with the same resources.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Any other advice for e-com leaders or folks more broadly within organizations, CPG companies, brands that are facing the challenges and opportunities associated with e-commerce growth?
I think the biggest challenge and area to work on is it's not data, it's not technology, it's not tools, it's structure and it's ways of working. I had a great conversation with a client the other day, CPG space, and we were talking about the evolution he went on. And he said, he's like, Mike, a year ago, before the pandemic, I would have graded us 1 out of 10 in terms of e-com maturity. And then now, I would give us a 6 out of 9. We've put the right content in place. We've got retail media. We feel good about our strategy. And I said, well, what would make you go from a 6 to a 9? And he said, really, it really comes down to structure. Like, I don't feel like we're still structured in a way that's like agile enough to adapt in this space. And he gave a really good example. He was talking about, ChatGPT and all this content we create. I can have ChatGPT. I could create more content. I'm not sure our teams would know what to do with that or how to deploy it. And it's very similar across the board. I think e-com folks can run really far and fast with retail media and content. And then they reach a point where they get stuck with their assortment or their pricing strategy, and they have to cross over the aisle into that terrain that they do not control. And I think that's the challenge of the e-com person, is you have to learn how to influence the people that you don't have direct responsibility, or everything you talk about is foreign to them. And once you do that and you can create ways of working and a cross-functional model, then you're going to accelerate from a 6 to a 9. And so I would say, if I was an e-com person looking to go from average to great, it would be, how do I break into that other side of the org? How do I bring them along the journey? And then how do I actually get them to raise their hand and take ownership for some of these things? It's not easy, but that's where the big leverage is going to be. And I think that's the next journey for an e-com leader.
So how do you see the world? I know this is going to be the typical interview question of, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Where do you see the industry in 5 years? How is it going to evolve? What does it look like? What new challenges are going to emerge as we look into the future?
I clearly see a much more I think the digitized experience that we know today as being just on e-commerce is clearly going to go into the store. We're seeing this already with things like cooler screens. I think there's going to be a much more dynamic shopping experience where there's like almost a constant sort of advertising digital space in the store that's going to just mirror and look a lot like our e-com experience. I think it'll just be a much more dynamic world. Maybe even from a pricing perspective, I think things will be sort of set and defined in a very kind of real-time way. And I think that will then further accelerate the need for a lot of organizations to get as fast. So I see this kind of like, married way, between the digital kind of going in the physical space. And then I also just think like the actual work of e-commerce like things will have to go faster. So, everybody's talking about this. Obviously, ChatGPT, OpenAI. Clearly, it's in the nascent stages, but we all see where the trend is headed. Is I can learn and test almost immediately. I can create content. I can create copy. I can optimize in ways I never could before, because I could have the data, but I still needed to do something about it. Now we potentially have a pipeline. The data is measuring and the generation is happening. And if we can just build a pipeline to get that out to the retailer systems fast, I mean, we're living in a world where there's just instant optimization, not just digitally, but physically. So that's where I see it, is digital goes into the physical store. And then we have AI that is like basically on this constant, always on optimization engine, and continues refining. And then, that's where we're headed. And it's a question of, which organizations are going to be able to, process and internalize that much change.
Yeah. I'm smiling because I couldn't agree with that outlook more myself, because that's the world we're preparing for. So you have this kind of closed loop ecosystem where there's trust in algorithms, because to your point earlier, humans can't make all the decisions, particularly across all the fragmented channels that we're seeing, the speed of the market, all of those pieces. So it has to be continuously optimized, leveraging technology, leveraging data in a real-time way. And that's where we're headed. And I think there's going to be a combination of finding the right talent to be able to manage that ecosystem, but also making sure your tech stack's right to be able to enable that change that's going to be necessary, and the environment as it continues to evolve.
Yeah, and hopefully by then we'll have our feet up on a cruise ship somewhere.
Exactly.
AI will be doing everything for us, right?
Exactly. Awesome. Well, Mike, this has been a phenomenal conversation. I think we've enjoyed kind of partnering with you and getting to know you, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. Hopefully, make that future world happen together. So again, appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today.
Yeah, same here, Greg. Really appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. Thanks again.